Hello everyone, my name is Joshua. This is the 34th video of my video journal series. Today's date is Saturday the 14th of March 2026. And something that's been on my mind today is procrastination. Not to say I've been procrastinating today, but I often, reflect on my youth. And, back then, years and years ago, I was a very, unproductive person. I often left stuff to the very last minute. I was often just, disengaged in class activities. I didn't like writing essays. I left homework, up until the night before it was due. And I was a very unorganized person. I remember, it would have been a couple of years ago from now, I handed in a piece of homework that was very botched, very rushed, because I left it to the last minute. And that was because I was procrastinating throughout the entire week. And I looked at that task and I'm like, you know what? I'm ashamed of myself for writing something as garbage as that. I do not want to repeat this habit of procrastination of mine. And from that day forth, I worked really hard to develop organized routine where I prioritize what I need to do first, and really get a start on stuff early. And it's helped me, ever since that day, I haven't left a piece of homework or an assignment late, which is good. But it took me, yet again, a lot of effort. It took me years to develop. But then, I guess something else that popped into my mind was, why do people procrastinate? People like me procrastinate. And I feel like it's one of two mindsets. When you're, you know, I guess I'll use an analogy of an essay, all right? Let's say you're about to write an essay and you look at the question, and this is the first mindset. You look at the question and you're like, I do not know what this means. You think a task is way too complex and you have no clue where to start. You're like, I do not know what this means. You know, have way too much to unpack here. How am I going to write this? You're a little bit anxious and you're like, how am I ever going to get this done? And that makes you feel disengaged from a task. You don't want to do it anymore. Or you could be, I guess, on the other hand, the other mindset, which is, this task is way too easy. This question is way too easy. But I'm going to leave this till later. But then you realize when later comes, you haven't started it and you left it overdue. It always happens. I've heard a lot from my friends when they're like, something is way too easy. Wow, I can knock this down. But then they're just like, you know what, I'll leave it tomorrow. But then tomorrow comes and then they suddenly forgot about it and they're quickly trying to do it last minute in class. And I guess I'll tell you how to get out of both of those mindsets, how to overcome these hurdles and challenges and overcome procrastination. Um, Step one would be, I guess, simplification. If you're in the first mindset, right, where you think a task is way too hard, or way too complex, then what you want to start doing is just unpack the question. Just take a step back, take a breather, and just unpack the question. Do a mind map. Write up a draft. Just do something as simple as, I guess, highlighting the keywords, looking back on your, I guess, course content, and just doing a lot of thinking. You don't have to start writing just away. You just do a lot of thinking, and eventually it'll come to you. If it doesn't, then go talk to a teacher, go talk to a friend, go talk to maybe your parents. Someone who, I guess, would provide an alternative perspective of that question or might know what it means. Um, and I guess, if you're still stuck, then, go back to your course readings, go back to your evidence, go back to the information you've gathered, and then, develop your mind map and, just point the key words of that question to the mind map. And then it should eventually, click in your brain like, I know what this means. Look at the key word, describe, analyze, assess, the all different things that they want you to do. Don't get them mixed up. I mean, an assessment usually requires a judgment based on criteria. Describe your going characteristics of. At least this is what I'm just going off based off the HSC, um, exams, because I remember, I think NESA, which is the New South Wales Education's Standard Authority, they released a glossary of all the key um, directory verbs like describe, analyze, assess, and they all have different meanings. So don't get them mixed up. Look what they search up what they mean if you don't know what it means. Outline is very much different to assess. And if you miss out on that key, I guess, directional verb, you're gonna be, I guess, writing an answer to the wrong question. So yeah, look very close what the question is trying to tell you. And then you might say to yourself, I'm really struggling, to think about key ideas about my essay. What evidence should I use? Yet again, go back to your mind map, go back to the readings, simplify it, just don't overthink it. And then, you're like, all right, well, what's a key thing you can talk about based on that pile of information which you've just gathered? Group them into themes or common things which you notice, patterns within that piece of information. If you're writing up an English essay, your themes might be already given to you by a teacher, or you might have to generate your own themes. Well, then, group a bunch of quotes that sound similar together, and then think to yourself, all right, what does this mean? What's the symbolic meaning of these quotes? That will basically be your theme. And keep on doing that, just keep on grouping similar quotes or similar pieces of information together, because that'll be a recurring theme. That'll be a big idea which you can explore in your essay. And then you might think to yourself, all right, I've done all of that, but I don't know where to write. Well, just start writing a draft, right? You're never going to get it perfect the first time, right? Drafts are meant to be ugly. They're meant to be rough. They're meant to be, not the best, but it gets down all your ideas. Often my challenge was that, I was always anxious while writing because I feared my writing wasn't good enough. What I did was I just created a separate Google Doc, all right, that I, explicitly wanted no one to see. I never wanted anyone to see my drafts on this doc, because I'll just, start writing and writing and writing like a stream of consciousness. I'll just write the most, mumbled essay ever, where it's just like a bunch of words just stuck together with like sticky tape, and it doesn't really make sense to anyone reading it, but to me, I've gotten everything out of my brain on paper, just jumbled around like a unassembled jigsaw. And my goal is to put all the pieces together and to constantly rewrite that same sentence over and over again until it sounds just right. Try that, stream of consciousness approach when you're doing an assessment. Maybe not when you're, I guess, in the HSC, or when you're writing an exam, in real time. But if you're given like 2 weeks, to write an assessment, I'll definitely recommend doing that. It's a slower method, but it makes you, I guess, more productive when writing, because it shows to yourself that, from a rough draft, the only way you can go up is just, with a rough draft, realistically, the only way is up. You keep on improving your draft, and eventually you'll get there. You'll get to that, finished state where you're like, hey, I just built a coherent essay out of just mumble jumble. And, that's just the way I've been approaching how to write essays. I mean, it's really different when you're writing an essay in real time, because, you got to get it right the first time. But, I guess that's where, those my method really just deviates. It might not work for everyone. You might have your own method of writing essays, and that's completely fine. But I'm going to move on to the second bit, where you're too confident in a task and you leave it to last minute because you're like, oh, wait, this is way too easy. I can just do this tomorrow. Don't, all right? And, you might just look at a task, and you're like, oh, it's easy. But when you start unpacking it, you realize it's a lot more complex than you may think. Always prioritize what you're going to do first. If something's due tomorrow, you want to do that one first. But never underestimate that assignment that's 2 weeks away, because realistically, it's only really coming closer, closer, closer to you. So, my method is just get an early start on it. Like I said, just even if it's just writing down the due date of a task in your calendar, or even if it's just writing, a single paragraph per day, that is still progress. Just make small little steps, because if you think a task is easy, then you should be like, all right, well, it should be easy for me to take a small step every single day. If I have to write a 2,000 word essay in 20 days, then you're going to do 100 words each day. But when you progress with a task, it naturally poses, I guess, hurdles. It might be like, all right, this task is wanting me to do something extra. It's wanting me to do, um, something that I don't know how to do. Um, Slowly, when you unravel a task, you realize how complex and how elaborate it may become. And that's when, you realize, oh crap, this thing isn't as easy as I thought. But then you left it till like the night before, which is a bad thing. So, you know, you just got to keep it simple. You just got to basically evenly divide up the work each day, develop a schedule if you haven't already, prioritize what you need to do first, and then don't leave what you think may be far away to the very last minute. It's like that scene from Jurassic Park, when they look in the mirror, it's like objects may be closer than they appear. Same thing with assignments and homework and just anything really. If you just procrastinate on a task, realistically, it's only really coming closer and closer and closer to you. But that's when, you just got to overcome that procrastination. You got to think to yourself, all right, I'm going to start by, just tasking myself to write 100 words, which is really easy, writing 100 words, and just saying to yourself that if I can master this small little task, this small little step, then there'll be plenty more steps to come. I can actually do this. It gives you a sense of accomplishment. You're like, hey, this might not be so bad after all. Or, hey, this question, it's a lot more complex. It's actually a decent challenge. I, need to get a start on this now because, it's going to take me long time to write. And, I guess if it's one golden rule in trying to overcome procrastination, it's just keep it simple and keep engaged. I guess there could be two separate things, but I guess that's just it really. Keep it simple, be engaged. um, you know don't try and overthink stuff, but at the same time think critically, think deep. When you're engaged in a task, be engaged. That's it. Be engaged. Um, and like I said, there's plenty of ways to be engaged. It might differ from everyone, but you're gonna I guess in order to run, you need to walk. That's a very bad analogy, but you know what I mean, right? Rome wasn't built in a day. You can't, build a house in a single day. You got to take the small steps first before you can start running. And I feel like that's how you overcome procrastination. Just say to yourself, instead of saying, I can't do this, I don't know how to do that, start by saying, I can do this and I will learn how to do this. You got to, I guess, change, you know, how you think a task is viewed. Um, don't underestimate stuff that, like I said, could be 2 weeks away, but then suddenly it smashes you in the middle of the exam period. But yeah, I guess just to top it off, it's just be engaged, limit the distractions around you, and take those small little steps one at a time. Take a breather. Sometimes you need to take a break from burnout, which is fine. I encourage it. But then you need to go back in, and you're like, all right, I will guess just try to adapt. I will eventually get there. I will do this. You know, always be in a supportive mindset. You know, just always just slowly chip at it. All right, slowly chip at it. Lay one brick at a time. You know, and hopefully someone who's watched this, it's helped you. I mean, for me, it's helped me tremendously. Not to say I, 100% free from procrastination. I do procrastinate sometimes. But then I realized that, hey, I need to get back to what I'm doing. I need to get back to this piece of work, and that's it. Hopefully it comes helpful to you in exam period. Yet again, you can leave your comments down below. How would you, I guess, tackle procrastination or writing responses to exam questions, or assessment tasks, or even doing something like washing the dishes. That could be another source of procrastination. But yet again, thank you for watching, and I guess I'll see you next time. Take care.